We're going to give it just one more minute and we'll get started. Thank you for joining today's webinar. So Chelsea, I think we're ready to get started, okay?
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chelsea Townsend, and I'm the director of the South Carolina Prescription Monitoring Program, and I chair the NASCSA Education Committee. I'll be hosting this afternoon's webinar along with NASCSA's Kathy Keogh. Hopefully you guys read the scrolling material while waiting for the webinar to start, which provides information regarding our sponsors, a NASCSA disclaimer, housekeeping items, and announcements. One thing to note is that travel scholarships are available. We are hoping to have the preliminary conference program available by the end of May. And then just as a reminder, the PMP Data Integrity Subcommittee created that free continuing education for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians that's still available until October of 2024. So please reach out to me if you need more information about it. It counts as part of their CE for license renewals. Today's webinar and all of our webinars throughout the year would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. So thank you to all of our sponsors, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Today's webinar is going to be on pill presses and the counterfeit drug trade. We're thrilled to have an extremely qualified expert, Shabbir Safdar. Please allow me to introduce him. Shabbir Safdar has been at the Partnership for Safe Medications for over a decade when he was tapped to lead it in 2017. The partnership, founded in 2003, is a not-for-profit focused entirely on researching the danger of counterfeit drugs in America and educating the public about how to stay safe from them. I'm glad we're all here to join Shabbir as he shares his extensive knowledge on this topic. And welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody. I'm just going to click share my screen real quick here so that we can follow along my presentation. And I know that I did give permission to have all this shared, so the slides will be available for folks after the event, and also I think a recording. I like to talk and answer questions. I like people, if you have questions as we're going, to ask them. So I'm just going to suggest that you throw them into the chat, and I'll just keep an eye over here on the chat as we're going along and answer them as we go. Can I just get one note from my fellow hosts in the chat that you can see the slides before I continue? I've actually, unfortunately,
I can see it.
Okay, I once did a whole 10-minute presentation where no one could see the slides. It was embarrassing. Okay, so you know where I'm coming from. The Partnership for Safe Medicines is a coalition nonprofit, and we are made up of people who touch medicine in the supply chain from the factory floor to the patient. So we have, nonprofits and trade associations that represent manufacturers in our coalition, and then wholesalers and distributors, tons of pharmacists. I spend all my time with pharmacists. My partner, my colleague Sven Bergman, spends all his time with law enforcement that are in our ally group, and then patient groups. A lot of HIV patient groups right now. We do a lot of work with HIV patient groups right now because one of the largest criminal cases that we've seen in counterfeiting has happened with HIV over the past 4 years, worth about $250 million, which in therapeutic counterfeits is like the largest things that I've ever seen. So I'm going to cover what our PSM's fascination with pill presses and the use of criminals in having them, how they get them, and I want to talk about some issues on the horizon which I don't think are actually covered by statute yet. But it contribute to counterfeit medicines. That's a list of our members. You can just see it on the website. I don't have to read it to you. All right, so pill presses, and I'm going to go through what they look like here, are machines for making pills. And if you are in the business of making fake pills, they're a really useful machine. We track them. If you go to our website, you can see this map is actually a live updated map there. Every state in pink is a state in which we have seen a pill press seizure through open sources. We don't actually have privileged material from investigations not made public. So if you are from Wyoming and you have seized a pill press and want to tell me about it, that's great. But it's not on this map because you didn't tell a reporter who published it or put it in an indictment announcement. When you see the red triangles, I believe that my staff is marking those as things that have been seized since the beginning of 2024. And obviously, there's usually an excess amount near a CBP port of entry. There's a lot to unpack here, and there's a lot of seizures going. I think there's a pill press machine problem. There's also a lot of successes to talk about, especially with CBP. And in the last couple of years with law enforcement, actually, we're starting to recognize what these things look like. So let's just talk about the problem real quick. This brick on the left of what I think are M30s because they're the right color is one of the largest bricks of fake pills I've ever seen that was seized in Arizona. I'm sure there have been larger seizures, but that's a pretty big brick somebody stuck into plastic. And that's a controlled substance. That's a counterfeit controlled substance made with a pill press. In the middle is an example of a counterfeit therapeutic that was seized on the border in Mexico, where someone used a pill press, the same pill press probably they used to make M30s, with just a different mold in it to make a anticoagulant, or what we would call a blood thinner. And these products were found in early 2022. We found out about them in January and were asked to do a public campaign raising awareness about the danger. And these pills were pressed with no anticoagulant active pharmaceutical ingredient. So if you took it and you needed a blood thinner, you got nothing. And we did get some stories of patient harm. Obviously, if you need a blood thinner, you really, really want it to be real. And then the issue that is not on many people's radar that I want to talk about today also is vials, right? So there's a lot of increasing advanced medicine that is made that is biologic, so it's grown or it's suspended in saline, right? So it's a really complicated molecule that attacks a tumor, for example, or in this case, it has a botulism toxin that is grown for different purposes, like TMJ in your jaw or migraines, or if you take it for cosmetic purposes. And these things are sold and shipped in vials, and the vials need to be capped a certain way. You can actually, buy them on Amazon. I actually bought this one, pulled off the top and filled it with water as a demonstration. But machines that do this are also a key part of the crime technique that people use. So let's talk first about pill presses. I'm actually going to show you while you're looking at that. There's actually, pill presses are so simple that it can be nothing more than this. This is a hand pill press that makes one pill at a time. And if you're thinking about that old Johnny Cash song, One Piece at a Time, yes, so am I. You put your powder and your ingredients into this thing, and it's got a little cylinder, which I just dropped on the floor, and you put it in there, and it basically compresses the material into a little disc, and then you squeeze this closed or screw this closed, and then you use these two levers on the side to squeeze the pill down, and with pressure, it forms it into the little pill puck that you and I are all familiar with. That is the simplest form of pill press. I actually bought that thing on Amazon. You're not going to start a relatively large crime empire with that thing, but it just goes to show you that anybody who really wants to can make a pill with very inexpensive materials. This is a slightly more involved pill press. It is still, I think, a one pill at a time. It resembles a slot machine in that respect. But you can do this. And if you know a little bit about how cheap fentanyl is, and this machine for $400, you realize that you can make a lot of money. You would earn back the money spent on the fentanyl and on the excipient powder and this machine probably in an hour of dedicated arm pulling if you wanted to. This is a slightly more complicated one. This tablet press, $3,500. It's for sale. I love the fact that they have a DEA disclaimer on here. PSM has found that many vendors overseas are not very particularly careful about who they sell to. I don't know if there's a way around this particular one, but this is a fully automated machine. You'll put your ingredients in, and you'll put your molds in, which do wear out over time, and then you press the button and let it run for a while. You'll make your money back even faster with this. And then you're going to need a mold, and we'll talk about molds, but here's two examples of molds that are sold online for making the M30 on the left, and then of course I'm pretty sure that's an Adderall on the right. Adderalls tend to be orange. I'm not a pharmacist, so I can't I can't tell you about everything, but these molds are not particularly hard to get. Second kind of machine used for making fake pills is not technically a pill press, but there's capsules. If you've gotten medicine before, you have these capsules, you pull them apart, and there's powder inside. This is a capsule filler. It's for making 100 at a time. Obviously, you can still sell counterfeit medicines with things like this that you make. You can put anything you want in here. It's not as good as taking a capsule, making a capsule and selling it, but I do think that people think of it as a sort of safer than just taking raw powder. Here's a very high-end capsule filling machine, and these are technically in statute, I believe, called encapsulation machines, and they are covered in all the statutes that cover tableting machines, which is the traditional pill press that people think about. Here you can see again, they've got a DEA disclaimer, which may or may not be real. And then I want to talk finally about these vials, right? These vials that we get biologic drugs in, which, by the way, it's a lot more complicated to make a fake tablet than to make a fake biologic in a vial, because all you need to do is put saline in here. You don't actually have to you just use water if you want. If you're going to make a fake pill, you need like dyed powder and maybe an active ingredient, but no one can tell that this isn't water when they think it's supposed to be an oncology drug. And here's a manual capping machine. I just pulled this here off of Amazon just the other day. I don't think it has any controls on it. And then here's a more advanced one that is an auto vial capping machine. And we've seen in counterfeiters trials, we've seen evidence where the prosecutors, got access to their Gmail and watched them try and negotiate for the purchase of these sorts of machines. So they definitely use them in crime. And so that's actually what I want to mention here, which is that if you look at different places in statute where these things are covered, you almost always see pill presses and encapsulating machines mentioned together. You don't often see vial filling or capping machines mentioned at all. There is some great stuff we'll talk about in a minute about the issues around about legality of pill presses. And then in some state law, you do see pill presses and encapsulating machines. Some states have taken that approach. I don't think that I've seen legislation ever covering a vial filling or capping machine, neither in state or federal law. I think it's just not something that people think about a lot. And you'd be surprised. I don't think the answer, by the way, is to make them all illegal, but we can talk about that. So let's actually go through some detail here about how you make fake pills. Back in 2019, when pill presses were not something everybody knew about, we did this graphic, which I thought was pretty great, to try and explain it. Basically, you need a pill press, a pill mold, you got to get supplies and make fake pills. And then I will tell you, for people who have who've done some prosecutions, you also need an orange Home Depot bucket. I don't know why this is, but counterfeiters love the orange Home Depot bucket to use to catch their fake pills as they come out of the machine. So these are some examples of different machines that we found. On the far left is something that was from a DOJ prosecution, indictment announcement, actually. They took a picture of that along with someone's life goals written on that styrofoam plate. That's, whenever you see the manual item, the manual piece, that's generally not an automated machine. Even if it's got electricity, that is generally out there, someone's pulling that. And the same thing with the wheel. The wheel machines have a similar effect. There is some, it's like semi-auto, I guess is how we think about it. These things are always in a very dusty, dirty, not a room in which you'd want to take medicine that was made in. And the far right one is a pretty heavily, fully automated machine that no one's hands go into. You just start it. You need a mold, and the molds are an issue, right? Like there's the molds are actually often covered by trademark, right? They're for making their crime, for making trademark crime, I guess is the way to put it. And you'll see, I think in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, some specific call outs to these dyes, these molds, but they are available. And I have a photo here on the top left of a vendor that sells molds for all sorts of little novelty things. And you'll see them sell these things under the idea that this is for candy, right? A lot of people will claim that they're selling these for candy. I actually think that they're probably for candy rave drugs, to put too fine a point on it, which is that they're out here for people to make this. But these same people I've seen from time to time sell molds. So you remember I showed you the fake blood thinner from Mexico? So one of the fake blood thinners we found was an 894-5 pill, which has an 894 on one side and a 5 on the other. And at the time we were doing the coverage of that, we actually found this mold for sale online, which sort of put it all together for me. Like the guys in Mexico, probably the cartels that were doing this work, making M30s by the millions to ship to the States, just took out the M30 mold and they put in an 894-5 mold. And then that day they made a batch of fake blood thinner. And then they took that back out and put back in the M30 mold and went back to making Oxy. We got a question in the chat who's Catherine said she's surprised there isn't a law on vial caps. And am I aware of any legislation being introduced in Congress to address this? And has the media covered this issue much? And the answer is no, I'm not aware of any legislation. I actually, from my point of view, I'll show you why. I don't think that legislation is the best answer to this. I wouldn't object to it, but I don't know that it's going to have the effect we want. And I'll cover that a little later. And has the media covered this? I would say not at all. We're right now going through a fake Botox outbreak in 11 states. The ingredients in the vials being investigated by the FDA and the CDC. The ingredients are definitely not what's supposed to be there. And no one's mentioned the ease with which people can, make fake vials and cap them, or buy vials, fill them with crap and cap them. So that's an issue. I just want to take a moment. If you scan that QR code, you can see our alert from 2022 when we actually covered the Mexican pharmacies doing all this fake blood thinner crime. And I just want to do a quick call out to every CBP agent and every law enforcement agent that's ever actually found and knew what a pill mold was. Those things are small. I don't understand how it is that CBP is so good at catching these pill molds as they come in the 10 million packages that come in every 3 days, but they find them. And every time they find one, that's one less manufacturer who's got a mold to make fake pills that'll kill somebody. So I love it. I'm absolutely in awe. So these are the 3 photos of the fake blood thinners that we got, that undercovers for the manufacturers bought on the Mexican side of the US-Mexico border and in Cancun. I always laugh at these because, it's almost a perfect label that they use, and the pills were also perfect. My favorite, though, is that the guys who made this counterfeit got a little lazy. If you look at the middle photo of the fake Eliquis bottle and you turn your head sideways, they got lazy and didn't look up the UPC code. So it's 01234567891123, which is hilarious. But yeah, the ease with which we have basically seen criminals deploy fake pills and manufacturing capacity with fake pill presses making fake pills. They now have it's almost like an effort to make a dispersed manufacturing base. They can now take any mold for any kind of pill and put it in there and start making those fake pills. So whatever it is that might be useful tomorrow, they can go into the business of doing it. They've got all the infrastructure in place, and not just in Mexico. Like you saw that map, all over America, there's people with pill presses, many that have been found and many that have not been found. So when you go to put your pill press operation together, you've got your pill press, now you've got your mold, you need something to put in it. If you're going to put something in it that is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, you need to buy that, right? Fentanyl, meth, research chemicals, whatever it is that you're going to use as the active ingredient. But that's not going to be the whole of the pill. The pill is going to have some binder to hold it together and something to make the bulk of it, right? Like 1 milligram of fentanyl, which is the therapeutically relative amount that you want, is tiny. You can't make a pill of it without losing it, right? So what you really need is extra product, extra powder to hold it together. We've seen tons of stuff, all these things, the baking soda, the rat poison, the antifreeze. We've seen these in counterfeit medicines for a number of years. And yes, drywall and sawdust. None of that stuff obviously is healthy. But you're going to need some product. And so you're going to need a product like this. You're going to need a binding agent. This happens to be Firmapress red powder. You can kind of see from it's kind of clear that that's a red powder. This is actually my kitchen table. I took a picture of this and put some in a little measuring cup so you can see what the color is. It's more pink than red in my opinion. As far as I can tell, there are no controls over the sale of this powder. And I think whether or not there should be is a whole conversation that we can have. But as of the moment, there's no controls. I didn't actually have to do anything except prove my identity. So they had a basic know your customer program in place that LFA had when I bought this bag of Firmapress. But that's what you're going to mix with your active pharmaceutical ingredient if you're even using one when you go to make your pill. And that stuff is pretty easy to get. I mean, I don't know why I would use drywall, which people have used when you could buy this stuff, and it's actually pretty good at its job. But LFA, which is a well-known vendor in this space, sells on Amazon, which is where I think I actually bought my product. There's another place that you can get active ingredient. Unfortunately, the internet is now full of people selling chemicals labeled for research purposes only. And we just put out an alert about Etsy. The chemical sellers have invaded Etsy, and I guess their argument is that because they made it, it's homemade. But you can buy all sorts of research chemicals on Etsy. I actually remember the moment at which my staff handed me a picture of what they said was P2MP, which is a precursor for making meth. And I was like, where have I heard that before? Oh, it was in Breaking Bad. They actually had to rob a warehouse to get a 55-gallon drum of that precursor chemical. But they're now selling this stuff on Etsy. It's all labeled for research purposes only, not for human consumption. And you'll see when you dig in, like in the comments for some of these listings on places like Etsy, that they clearly intend for it to be used for human consumption, but they always say it's for home researchers. And this is an alert we just put out recently. The semaglutide compounding product market has been really big on Etsy as of late, although they're cracking down. But you'll find a ton of listings on Etsy of people selling active pharmaceutical ingredients only by the CAS name, which is a chemical abstract, I think Chemical Abstract Society. It's a universal global numerical identifier for chemicals, or they'll advertise it purely by the molecular diagram, which for me, if I was working in Etsy's brand trust and safety team, I wouldn't even know what that was to know if they should or shouldn't be selling it. You'd have to employ a pretty smart chemist to be able to figure that out. Let's see now, this is an example. I'm going to go ahead and play this. And let me I just want to turn off the sound because it's really loud for me. I don't think you can hear it. This is an example of a real pill press operation. This was a video that was posted to Reddit a number of years ago, and this was posted by someone who claimed to be the Alper King. Alper King was a guy who made fake Xanax and sold it for a Bitcoin. And there's a whole great story there about how after he retired, it appears that maybe he actually got robbed at gunpoint in his home for some of that Bitcoin. But he was doing what's called an Ask Me Anything, or an AMA interview on Reddit, where he was talking about how you actually be in this business in a successful way, in a sustainable way, where you actually don't just get busted right away. And he said, you have to move your operation around on a regular basis, never stay in one place, always shut down at the first hint of trouble, and move shop if you have to. And you can see really just how small a space you need to actually have a pill making operation. This room is probably not even 10 by 10. It's completely surrounded with what I assume is noise dampening, but also reflective material, which has the added benefit of also being sort of easy to keep clean. You can clean up this room with rags pretty fast. And he's got this very loud machine working in here, and you can't hear it because I've got the sound turned down. But every time a pill drops out of that hopper, he's pointing at it and saying 50 cents, 50 cents, 50 cents, which is his cost for making this stuff, which he then sells for quite a bit more online. And unfortunately, he doesn't have room for the orange Home Depot bucket, so he had to get a larger bucket, but that would be my favorite. All right, so that's a controlled substance, right? Xanax is a controlled substance. The benzos and the alprazolams of the world. But why make counterfeit therapeutics, right? Why make, with a pill press, why would you make these blood thinners? Why would you make counterfeit HIV meds? Well, as much as you might think that the controlled substance market is great profit, a bottle, a 30-day supply of a HIV medicine probably wholesales for like $3,000 or more. So that's a really good profit. And the penalties are less severe if you don't have a controlled substance in there. So that's one. I'm gonna take a little pause, and I didn't realize that people were raising their hands. So there's a question from Lisbeth Olmida. Would you like to ask your question? I don't even know if you can unmute. Chelsea, if you have her question, do you want to ask it?
I don't have her question, but Lisbeth, if you have a question, if you'll type it in the chat, I don't think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, and I actually don't see the question either, and I don't see her hand raised.
Okay. All right, I'll let you fish that through. A second point is that the lack of a controlled substance is a real improvement, right? Like, if you can get your case investigated by the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigation instead of the DEA, I think you probably want that, right? The DEA's footprint and budget is bigger. I'm a huge fan of what the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigation does, but the true fact is that they don't have as much money or as many agents or as big a footprint as the DEA does, and I think they punch above their weight. But you definitely want the smaller law enforcement agency to be investigating you than the larger one. And finally, of course, the reason to put this stuff in pill form is that people are used to taking pills, right? You see over and over again, people will take pills or take pills from friends or buy pills and swallow them when they wouldn't actually do that with the raw powder. People who would not do fentanyl will eat a fentanyl pill. People who would not inject fentanyl will actually swallow a fentanyl pill. And so it basically disguises and rides on the trust that people have for this material. So I think this is a little less true now, but it used to be that a lot of what I would do would be presentations at NADI or law enforcement conferences, and we would do the pill press or drill press or reloader visual quiz, where I'd put all three up and I'd ask which one is the pill press and which one is the reloader and which one is a drill press. But that is actually similar. You saw the big slot machine arm that you see on a lot of manual pill presses. And that's actually a really good way to tell. CBP has gotten really great at finding pill presses being shipped into the country. And back in 2019, when we did our first report on pill presses, we actually captured websites that were advertising that they could do it by breaking it into parts and then shipping the parts in. But I've seen CBP even catch that stuff. So they know what's happening. And, probably just the limitations of the inability to search 1 million packages a day is probably what keeps them from finding more of them. But they do find them, and they do find them broken into pieces. And I really just love that about CBP's skills here. And I want to make a point here, 2 points about this. The first of which is, if you look at the bottom left corner, you'll see a machine with a V, right? That is also an integral part of the pill press operation. That is a materials mixer, right? Designed, and I think that one maybe costs about $5,000 from what I've seen. And that's for mixing, your materials together, like let's say your fentanyl and your binder powder that you bought to make the pills. But this is actually all from a bust in Canada. And the first one, I don't remember how they got tipped off, but it was I was in the Toronto area, and it was a fake pill making operation. And there's a couple of great things about it. They did have a pretty good machine, and you can see that they were able to make significant amounts of product. They, of course, as many do, love the orange Home Depot bucket, which they were storing them in. And you can see the quality of the imprint of this criminal operation was over here on the left. And like, the imprints of these pills are spectacular, absolutely spectacular. Like, as the DEA has said many times, you cannot tell the real from the fake. Sometimes the fake looks better than the real. One of the things I loved about this case, 2 things really. One of which is that they were making Teva oxycodone, which is a real product, a real opioid sold in Canada by the Teva company, but they screwed up and they actually made them in a wholesale bottle that's 1,000 tablets. 1,000 count bottle doesn't exist in Canada. Health Canada has never approved. Teva has never. It does not currently sell a 1,000 tablet bottle. So when these first were posted to Reddit, when someone bought one, like, immediately other people were like, that thing is totally fake. There's no way that that's actually real. You've got fake pills there, because someone was bragging that they had bought this whole bottle from someone. The second thing that I loved, and I'm going to keep an eye here on the Q&A window for Elizabeth's questions coming in. The second thing is that the Toronto police agency that busted these guys did that. They got all these pictures, they got people in jail. And then a couple months later, there was someone joyriding around the town with a car, and it was they were being very reckless, and they got pulled over for reckless driving. And when the police searched the trunk, they basically found all of this equipment, not the same ones, but someone had bought all the same equipment, and it turned out they were doing all the same crime. They just basically copied the entire crime, and they made the mistake of joyriding with a pill press in the trunk. And so they got busted again. So there is multiple rings, or at least multiple circles of people who are doing the exact same crime in Canada. So they have that problem too. We actually have a significant cross-border organized crime problem, motorcycle gangs and opioid trafficking happening as well. It's not us sending it to them. They also send us trouble.
So we're gonna try, because I see Elizabeth has raised her hand. So can you unmute yourself and ask the question? Unless she accidentally hit. For some reason, not going to put her on the spot. I apologize. Also, if you would put your questions actually in the Q&A. Apparently the chat doesn't seem to be working. I apologize.
All right, and then I'll go on until I see a question. So it is not particularly difficult to get a pill press. The the transfer of the pill press, the record of the sale is really the place where we have, I think, the most control um, over the pill press, and at least with current law. And we saw this today, or in recent time, when eBay settled with the DOJ over violations of related to pill press sales. And we did a whole explainer on this. And I really love actually how this came out. I love how the DEA did this. I love how the DOJ did this. There's a very clear reporting and record keeping obligation related to pill presses. And there is language in statute that makes it pretty clear that if you wanted to apply it to an online sales platform, you could. And so they did. They went to eBay and said, you appear to have been facilitating the sale and importation of pill presses for quite a long time now. And I presumably they asked for records, and they found tons and tons of pill presses that had been sold and imported into the country. And there was no reporting done by eBay. And then at the end of the day, eBay signed a settlement, paid $59. They already had a pretty good compliance program, and if you aren't familiar with how eBay did it, at some point eBay just completely banned pill presses from the platform. You just can't sell them on the platform. We don't even care if you're authorized, and we don't even want to deal with the problem. So long before the settlement came out, eBay had already put into place what I would say is a great compliance program. I had a lot of difficulty finding pill presses on eBay after they put that in place. And I was looking, I wanted a good example, but after they started it was really hard to do. And so part of that settlement, in which eBay admitted no wrongdoing, they committed to continuing their compliance program. And I think that, my opinion at the time this came out is that this is pretty much the end of pill presses being sold on any online platform that expects to ever have to deal with the criminal justice system in America, because there's sort of no way around how the DOJ applied statute to the platform here. And I can't see how anybody would be in this business anymore. After that came this letter from the DEA, which I loved, about warning e-commerce platforms that the same way that they applied the language here, they were going to apply it to all e-commerce companies, and how that was really great. I want to just take a moment and answer a question here. Where do people typically sell counterfeit drugs? Is it strictly just the streets? So counterfeit medicine enters the realm of American patients through a couple of routes. If it's a controlled substance, it comes through, obviously, yes, through street sales. Obviously, the dark web has always been a venue, and it'll come through websites that will sell controlled substances to Americans in the hopes that they can slip their package through the giant river of small packages that come in every day to America. Counterfeit controlled substance typically don't find them in a bricks and mortar pharmacy. That's, it has happened, but that's not usually the route by which you see them. Counterfeit medicines that are not controlled substances, the fake blood thinners, fake HIV meds, you'll see them come in through websites. I will always say this, that the person who is the greatest danger of exposing a patient to counterfeit meds in America is the patient themselves, right? They'll either go on vacation to Mexico or to some other country and buy medicine and think that it's safe, or they will go onto a website and order medicine to themselves, and they'll order it in small enough quantity that it will probably they'll not be, the ban on personal importation will not be enforced because it's not an enforcement priority, and they'll actually buy it themselves. We have seen, in some cases, people making counterfeits and selling them to licensed pharmacies, and that's the big HIV counterfeit scheme we've seen just in the last 3 years, the quarter $2 billion one. And in that case, they were taking advantage of selling completely sealed bottles to pharmacists who couldn't open it and check them. Right at the point at which the pharmacists can see the medicine, it becomes a lot harder to get through. But typically, it's through patients. patients for the non-controlled substances. There's one exception to that, which is that when you look at these things that are sealed in vials, when you look at the Botoxes, the oncology drugs, one of the real vulnerable points in the supply chain is physicians who don't practice in hospitals and do administration. So if you've had a family member who's had cancer and they're going through an oncology protocol treatment, and part of that is going to the doctor's office and sitting in an infusion chair for 2.5 hours, getting, for 6 weeks, getting their chemotherapy. If that physician is independent, doesn't work in a hospital, then that means there's some person in the office who orders lunch, copy or paper, and oncology medicine. And that person and the doctor will often skirt the supply chain to get cheaper medicine, which they believe is the same, but is not, and give it to patients. We're seeing right now this fake Botox. It's coming in by people who think it's the same. Tons of physicians have been prosecuted for fake Botox and fake oncology drugs. That's all super dangerous. So I would say after patients for non-controlled substances, after patients bringing it in, it's then healthcare professionals who are not pharmacists. And then, for controlled substances, yeah, it's a lot of street drugs and people ordering it on the web themselves. So thank you for letting me answer that longer question. So there's some great reporting that comes out of DHS about the amount of pill presses that they seize in a year. Fiscal year 2023, they seized more than 3,600. And every pill press, if it can make several hundred, several thousand, or for the high-end ones, tens of thousands of pills a day, you can tell that that's actually a pretty big footprint of safety that DHS agencies have protected us in terms of what they've taken out of the criminals' hands before they got there. And then there's also there's a lot of work being done now. We had, I believe it's called Operation Chainbreaker. It was Treasury sanctions against people who were part of the supply chain for making fentanyl-laced products, fake opioids. They actually took action, Treasury sanctions against some of the manufacturers of pill presses in China, which I thought was a super good move. Because they basically are not breaking the law as far as I can tell in China. And so they're not too worried as long as they don't go here. I think one of the greatest stories I ever heard about a pill press bust was the DEA once got alerted by CBP that they had a pill press coming into the country. And the DEA got a court order to put a GPS tag on the thing. I think it came through Long Beach. And they do a controlled delivery of this pill press to a residential home, and they do the delivery and they see the tag. They're following the GPS signal, and they realize that maybe they don't just rush into this home. And they were smart because then the pill press gets moved from the residential home to a warehouse, which is where they believe the end of it was. And so they get a search warrant. They go into the warehouse and they find that pill press that they had controlled deliveried next to like a half a dozen more that they didn't know about. So, it's like with everything in interdiction, it's a battle. But sometimes, because these machines have to be delivered and have to travel in places and there's vendor relationships, you can follow some of this trail and actually unravel crime. So there's some states who've tried to get rid of the pill press problem by passing laws controlling who can own or who can buy and sell pill presses. I haven't seen a lot of proof that these are super effective. The Florida law is the most recent one I've seen, and there have been some prosecutions here. But I don't feel like criminals are not selling pill presses, right? Or using pill presses in their work any less than they used to. So I'm not really convinced that it's sufficient. I wouldn't say no to it, but there's a couple of reasons. And if you look at our 2019 report that we did about pill presses, we talked at length to Sam Lewis, who's a former DOJ prosecutor. He worked out of Houston. He's got more counterfeit prosecutions than anybody. And he said, look, the pill press is useful because it's part of an indictment that demonstrates intent to distribute, right? Someone who's got a balance beam scale and 10,000, a big bulk of 10,000 bags, that's part of showing that they're in the distribution business. Well, having a pill press shows that they're in the distribution business too. They're not just, whatever you caught them with is not just for personal use. They're actually in the business of distribution, which obviously carries a higher charge. And I asked him, I said, well, how do prosecutors feel about charging this separate pill press crime? Because it can be a crime, like it can be its own standalone crime. And he said, prosecutors, and we talked to other prosecutors besides Sam about this, and he said, you don't want to appear like you're overcharging, right? And you don't want to actually have to explain the crime to a judge and jury, right? You are in the business of selling fentanyl, an illegal deadly opioid. Everybody understands what that is, right? Now to try and explain that you are also operating and illegally owning this machine that you're not supposed to have and didn't report when you bought it, that's harder. That's a lot harder to explain. And if you get into the minutia, it's actually most of the time, it's just the mold. The M30 mold is the thing that is really the crime. And again, it's hard to explain that to a jury. You don't want to prejudice the jury to think that you're just going to throw everything in the book at this guy. That controlled substance distribution charge is really well understood. And so, what we have come to think in terms of policy is that the more useful thing for states and the feds to do would be to take the pill press and use it as a penalty enhancer. There's a bunch of advantages to that. It doesn't actually kick in until you've actually concluded a successful prosecution. So for people who would say, hey, you charge, illegal pill press possession more often to people of color than white defendants, that wouldn't matter because it would only happen at the end of a successful prosecution, and it's not a charge. You don't have to explain what it is to a jury, and it avoids that concept of overcharging. But if you do get a prosecution that's successful, and then it's a penalty enhancement, and in this particular bill, which I don't think is actually going anywhere in this Congress, it adds 2 offense levels to the penalty that the individual gets for the violation if they committed this crime with a pill press. And I think that's actually probably pretty good. It gives the prosecutors more material to try and stall and negotiate and try and get their guilty plea out of a defendant without having to go to a trial, which you can do, but it's much better to get a solid guilty plea than to roll the dice with a trial where something may go wrong. At least that's what people tell me. I think we saw when China scheduled fentanyl that it actually changed fundamentally how the fentanyl trade worked. Unfortunately, a lot of it just involved selling precursors to Mexico, who then made the fentanyl with Chinese chemists. But I think that regulation of pill presses in China would help as much as any law in China helps anything in America. The inability to actually go after them for doing this, I think, is a problem. I don't have any hope that that's going to happen anytime soon, but it's certainly something that I hope someone's talking to the Chinese counterparts about. And that's it. I'm just going to play this another video here about another pill press. So this is something we found on TikTok. I believe that's a TikTok video. This is a Chinese vendor that makes pill presses, and they typically post these pictures showing the pill press in operation before they send it to you. So quite often these will have a little label on it that says "For Joe in Kokomo, Indiana," just to show that they're doing the QA test on the machine before they actually do the shipping. That's the end of my prepared material. We have a podcast that you can listen to. We just actually had an emergency podcast we made about the fake Botox crime with Sam Lewis, former DOJ, and Ron Bone, who's an expert in wholesale pharmaceuticals. And of course, you can find our stuff on all the social media channels. If you have a question, this would be a great time to throw it into the window, and I can answer it, or we can turn it back over to Kathy.
So one question I had was the website safemedicines.org. Does that have information about the podcast as well?
Yes, in the top right-hand corner, it doesn't actually show this, an old screenshot. In the top right-hand corner is our podcast promotion box, and you can get the podcast there.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions. Chelsea, do you want to sort of kick it off?
Yeah, I can close this out. So thank you again for coming to speak today. I always love listening to you speak. I've heard you at the conferences, and you're just really interesting to watch. So thank you. On behalf of NASCSA, I would like to thank everyone who joined us for today's webinar. And thank you, Kathy, for this excellent education opportunity. Thank you again to our sponsors for making today's webinar possible. And we wish you guys a wonderful rest of your day.